Fighters Code Grey. This is a show where we discuss human trafficking, an issue that's happening all across Canada. Please note that some of the information in the show may be triggering, as we will be dealing with topics and subject matter related to trauma and exploitation. If you're looking for information and support related to human trafficking in Canada, you can call the National Human Trafficking Hotline 24/7 at 1-833-900-1010. Again, that's 1-833-900-1010. Well, today I'm joined by Cassandra Harvey, who is a human trafficking survivor. And Cassandra, I'm just so grateful that you're taking the time to chat with me today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
Well, just to start our conversation off today, I'm just wondering if you can share a bit about yourself and some of the work that you're up to these days.
Yeah, so I am a human trafficking survivor. I'm also a mom, and I'm currently at York University in my third year of my undergrad degree. I'm doing a double major in criminology and law and society with a certificate in public administration and law.
Wow, okay, so you're very busy, a mom, and then also undertaking this degree with, multiple focuses. And so why did you decide to pursue criminal law?
So I think it mostly stemmed from my childhood. I grew up in the child welfare system, which had a huge impact on my life. And most of my biological family, many of them were incarcerated throughout my childhood. And a lot of my family members, including my mom, had substance abuse issues. And I kind of noticed how they were treated differently compared to everybody else, even when it came to interactions with police officers. And from my perspective, no one was a bad person. They were just put in a really bad situation. So that's kind of what initiated me going into criminal law. And I think too, growing up throughout my teenage years, myself, being involved with the wrong crowds and everything, it really helped solidify why I wanted to go into criminal law.
So I know you're studying criminal law, but you specifically an end goal of that is to be a criminal lawyer.
Yeah.
So why do you want to pursue that career in particular?
In particular, I want to do criminal defense. And I think, so everyone's always oh, why would you want to defend criminals and horrible people? But I'm a huge advocate for, I think, rehabilitation. No matter what crime that you do allegedly commit or are found guilty for, I think that everyone is put in people are put in really bad situations, which may be the reason why they commit a crime. And I focus on rehabilitation, and I am a strong believer in kind of meeting people where they're at and helping them navigate the challenges that life brings them.
That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing just your interest in doing this topic, but then also some of the backstory and the reason why you're committed to pursuing justice in these ways and caring for people. So about the show, we're talking about human trafficking, and so some of the people who are tuning into the show today may have heard that term and had misconceptions about what that is, or maybe they're what are you talking about human trafficking in Canada? So could you just take some time to explain what exactly human trafficking is?
Yeah, so there's different types of human trafficking. So there's labor trafficking, there's sex trafficking. In my own experience, I was sex trafficked. So typically what that means is there was someone who people would refer to as a pimp, and they would use you for they would exploit you for sexual services. So typically what that was traveling to different hotels. There's something called in-calls and out-calls. So an in-call is where a person would come to where you're staying to pay for a sexual service, and then an out-call is you would go to their home and perform a sexual service there. And with human trafficking and exploitation, any of the money that I had earned was going to the person who was pimping me out rather than me doing it by my own free will.
Wow. Cassandra, thanks for sharing about human trafficking, but also for the courage that you're just exhibiting by sitting here with me today and bringing forward this information from your own personal experience. And I could just see your commitment to wanting to make the world a better place and to make change for other people who have gone through difficult circumstances. When you were talking about your childhood and your upbringing, you mentioned foster care, and you said how, you see just brokenness in the system, if you will, and how that was happening in terms of different aspects of what was impacting your family. And so I'm just wondering if you could take some time to explain, from your perspective, how foster care and human trafficking are interconnected.
Yeah, so I think mainly, and it took me a while to, I think, admit it because I was so ashamed, but like growing up in the child welfare system, I never experienced love. And there are loving foster homes where they take in children and treat them like their own children and do all of those things. But in my particular situation, I was always in foster homes that had abused me. I was removed, I was put in other foster homes and so on. So growing up in my teenage years, I was so desperate to be loved and to be wanted. And it didn't matter who I was getting that love from, whether it was like love where they would physically harm me and then say, oh, but like I didn't mean to. And you know, we would make up. And I never experienced a healthy love, whether it was from my mom or anybody. And then in my teenage years, because I was in abusive foster homes, I started becoming, I would say, defiant. So I would run away all the time, and then the police would pick me up and bring me back to my foster home. And no one really ever listened to me when I had said, like, my foster home is doing, you know, X, Y, and Z to me. And they kind of just brushed it off. And they did, like, quote, their investigations. Investigations never led to anything. So when I was 15, I ended up just running away completely. The police did find me again, bring me back, but I refused to go. I kind of had more autonomy in that situation. So I refused to go back to the home. And then I ended up kind of just on my own and on the streets, which led me to getting pregnant at 16 and then again at 18. And when I was 18, I had lost my mom. So with being on my own, 2 kids of my own, and then losing my mom, I was particularly vulnerable. And then that's how I met people. I met the first one through Tinder. The first one I knew, the second one was from Tinder, and then the third person I had met through mutual friends.
Wow. When you were sharing and just explaining the different ways that you saw your experiences in the foster care system and how that led to just looking for love or searching and desiring to be loved, and then meeting these individuals who were exploiters, essentially. One thing that I heard you say was, you know, like, you weren't shown like a healthy relationship or like healthy love or things like that. Like, what value do you think that there is in like helping, whether it's a youth in the child welfare system or whether it's like youth in the world today, like understanding healthy relationships in order to prevent trafficking and exploitation from happening?
So I think even like I try to teach my kids what I've learned about healthy love. And I think like it's important for especially kids who are in the child welfare system to know the signs. And like I feel like social media plays a big part in things because it glorifies this toxic relationship behavior. So many of like young women are growing up and thinking that, oh, if he ignores me and then I block him and then we get back together, like this is healthy love and we love each other and we're always gonna find our way back. But I think like things to look for in a healthy relationship is not just what someone physically provides you with, but like, does someone understand like where you come from? Like, what was your childhood like? How did that impact the way you are today? Do they respect your time? Or do they respect the fact that you're not on your phone 24/7 and you can't respond all the time? Do they value you as a person and look to you and like support you in the emotions that you're going through rather than like using an example where if you say you need time, are they like, oh, do you need time for me because I'm doing X, Y, Z? That is not healthy. And you want someone who's like, okay, can I help you? Is there anything I can do to support you? I will give you that time and respect your space. So I think if I had learned from a young age how to be loved, but also how to love someone correctly, it definitely would have changed, I think, my life, because I wouldn't have fallen into those traps of like what a unhealthy relationship is like.
I feel like those practical examples that you just shared are so helpful and trying to explain, like in the digital age in particular, right? Like it's a new landscape that youth are facing when it comes to expectations around what's healthy or not and setting boundaries in relationships. I kind of want to go back to something that you touched on and mentioned earlier, but you were mentioning that workers that you disclosed things were wrong, that you weren't listened to. You mentioned some interactions with police. And so I'm just wondering, as you think about during your experiences of abuse and trafficking and trying to share those things, like what changes do you think are kind of needed in those spaces so that folks who have experienced trauma, who are coming forward and saying, hey, look, something, you know, is wrong here, like what changes do you see in the system in order to help ensure that people are heard and believed and listened to and responded to accordingly?
That's a loaded question, and there's like, I feel like I could go on for days, but I think like listening, and not listening to to ignore, but like to understand what someone is saying. And I know there's been tons of budget cuts with like the ministry and child services and everything. So I think like for me, when I was reporting, it was like, okay, yeah, we'll look into it. And they never looked into it. And I think unless I had, in some of my homes, I had like the physical scars for them to see like, oh wow, like she's actually being abused. But as I got older, it started less being physical and more like the mental and the emotional, and like being told that I'm gaining too much weight, or being told I would finish school at 2:45, I had to be home by 3 o'clock. Not being able to have a phone or to get a job. I was essentially like a prisoner in the home. And no one had ever listened to that. And then when I started being trafficked, I aged it. So at 16, you kind of age out of the system, and then you go, if you're on your own, you go into what's like a CCSY program. So they give you money to live every month if you're living on your own, and then you have a worker who kind of checks in with you. So when I was in that program is when I started being trafficked, and my workers were strictly 8 to 4. And when I was being trafficked, it's not an 8 to 4 thing, it's a 24/7 thing. So I never felt like I could reach out to anybody, partly because my workers had never listened to me about anything. And it wasn't until I had a very, very good worker, and she helped me through what I was going through at the time. And like vetting foster homes, I feel like anybody can be a foster parent, and they go through like these training modules and whatnot, but it doesn't really show like a person's character and how they're actually going to treat somebody, and just conduct like more thorough investigations because children don't say that they're being abused just to look for attention. Majority of the time, they are being abused even if they don't have the physical scars to show.
Cassandra, thank you for taking the time to share your expertise, your insights, and through reflecting on your own experience, suggest pathways that we can move forward to help prevent other people who may be vulnerable to experiencing exploitation, but also to support those who are experiencing situations of abuse. And welcome back to Freedom Fighters Code Grey, a show where we discuss human trafficking in Canada. Today, I'm joined by Cassandra Harvey, who is a survivor of human trafficking. So Cassandra, I'm just wondering if you could share with our viewers, what do you think is important for them to know about human trafficking, how it's happening, what it looks like, how it's taking place in our community?
So I think the main thing is it's not what you see in movies. Like you're not walking down the street and you get kidnapped in a white van and then you're never seen again. It's definitely something that I think social media plays a big part in, but also people like I know people who were trafficked by people who they had known for many, many years. Some people were trafficked by their parents or a family member. And in my case, I did know the person. I knew someone, met someone on social media, and met someone through mutual friends. And I think just the things that happen after you're trafficked. So in my situation, it was I was in end of high school at the time, and just starting college. So a lot of people who I had known were always accusing me of doing sex work and that I was like a prostitute and I was all of these horrible things, but no one knew that I was being trafficked. And then even up until this day, just like the debts that I had incurred from being trafficked, because my traffickers had committed like fraud on my bank account, fraud throughout like CRA when I was being trafficked during COVID as well. So like the CERB benefits, my child tax benefit, all of the money that I had been earning, even from work at the time when I would work like a part-time job, it was all being taken by my pimp. And then the last thing I think is people don't think that when you're being trafficked, you still have some autonomy to live a life. So when I was being trafficked, yes, it was a 24/7 thing, but my trafficker still allowed me to have a part-time job, because when I was working part-time, I was making money, and that money was going to my trafficker. So as much as I was able to kind of live my life, I was still being controlled financially and physically at times by the person who was trafficking me.
As it relates to coercive debt, and you're just sharing about how your trafficker was kind of controlling your funds and taking funds and then resulted in a lot of debt, there's a new piece of legislation, Bill 41. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that is, and also what do you think about it?
So Bill 41 is a bill that had came out. It received royal assent in, I believe it was December 3rd of 2023. So it essentially protects survivors from coerced debt that happened during the time that they were being trafficked. So typically this would mean a trafficker who had maybe purchased a phone in their name through a contract, a car payment, a loan, a payday loan, anything of that sort, any debts that were incurred. And my personal opinion, so I'm the first person, I work with Project Recover at Victim Services Toronto. And essentially what they do is they help clear all of the coerced debt that I had incurred from when I was being trafficked. So they reach out to creditors and say, Cassandra was trafficked from this time to this time, the debt incurred was not hers. So then they're able to remove that debt. However, with the CRA, it's been particularly difficult because, again, it's like the government. They do extensive investigations on fraud claims. So as I feel like this bill is in place to help people, and that's great, but it also is coming from a place where there's no trauma-informed people. So in my case, working with Project Recover, and I believe it's actually called Project Reclaim, I believe now, but working with Victim Services, they're trauma informed, but then my file is the first in Canada to be sent to the CRA for the investigation process of coerced debt. So we don't really know the process, and I'm kind of I would say, the blueprint on how it's going to move forward for other survivors who make the same claim. And it's been a challenge because we're working with people who have a background in economics and accounting and business and all of these numbers, and they're not trauma informed. And as much as Victim Services can advocate for me, it's very, very hard for them to understand how coerced debts come. And in my case, they won't even speak with me. So they don't actually speak with the survivor unless it's absolutely needed. So they're conducting this whole investigation behind the scenes. They don't know my story. And there's only so much Victim Services can put in a letter. So it's very, very difficult in that regard.
From what you were sharing, it sounds like through the bureaucracy channels and different administrative levels as well, and then not to be able to speak directly to someone as well. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier about the importance of listening and listening in an open-ended way. And so it's great that there's new initiatives moving forward that can help someone remove coerced debt, but there's still much more work to be done, like you've said, to ensure that people are trauma-informed and that something's not happening without your input and presence, but alongside you and with you. And I remember right at the beginning of the show you mentioned it's important to meet people where they're at. Mm-hmm. And so in all of these initiatives, legislation pieces as well, it's okay, how can we do that, right? How can we have legislation that carries out where people are met where they're at to support them in their recovery, financial, or albeit something else. So I know one of your goals that you've mentioned, you have a website, so we'll make sure that website's available for folks. But one of the things that you say is that one of your aims is to empower others, and you want to foster a compassionate and informed community. So what are some of the ways that you are working to do that now?
So I think it's mostly starting with York University. So I'm the president of the Women in Law Association, and I've kind of been trying to educate everybody on what human trafficking is and kind of putting it where I can, speaking to people about it, sharing my story. And also, I think it's and I'm not at that stage yet, but I think it's incredibly important to know, and I genuinely don't believe that human trafficking is ever going to end. And I think that's very unfortunate, and it's a sad reality. There's ways we can mitigate it and reduce, the amount of people who are being trafficked. But I think it's incredibly important to help out like little boys who are in communities where gang violence is very prominent, and they are being recruited into gangs at such a young age, like 10, 11, and 12. And then these are the little boys who eventually become people who traffic other, young women or young boys. And I think if we're able to really provide support to young men and address mental health issues that they face and support them in school and elementary school with sports and academia and all of those things, we can try to mitigate the chances of them, getting involved in gang violence. And I think too, with women, with young girls, and educating them on what healthy love is, what are good friendships, how to set boundaries, whether it be with a female or a male, or even your parents or a family member. And in terms of like survivors, having them become comfortable with what had happened to them, because in my circumstance for so long, I kind of blamed myself for what had happened, and I thought that I let that happen to me. I let somebody take advantage of me and take advantage of my vulnerability. So even it's been, I would say, the last 8 to 10 months where I've really come forward with my story and started to share it. So I think educating women on how to embrace what has happened to you and turn it into something positive, and also you're not always going to be, and I know I asked you to I am a human trafficking survivor, but that's not all I am. And I'm going to school and I'm going to be a lawyer and I'm going to do so many amazing things. And I think organizations and police and society, once you're a human trafficking survivor, that's all they see you as, instead of viewing you as something so much more than that. So my goal is to really help young men and also empower women to become, fierce advocates in the future.
Wow, so many things that you just said are so insightful, so thoughtful, and I just felt like, what you just expressed was so important for people to hear, both from the ends of like something that people aren't talking about is the role of men in this, and what you were sharing of stopping the cycles of violence before they happen, right? And then what you were just reflecting on and sharing now, like in terms of your identity, like you are a mom, you are a leader, you are the president of the Law and Society folks, you are a student, and so many other words that you would use to describe yourself. And that's so important for service providers, anyone who's working with individual who has experienced trafficking, to know, right? That identities are so multifaceted. And so, thanks just for sharing that so brilliantly. Along the lines of that, one of the things you said is helping survivors feel comfortable, just recognizing maybe their experience or sharing it. What was helpful to you in doing that, or what was you said it's been about 8 months. So what do you think would be helpful for folks to support other individuals who have experienced something similar to you?
So for me, I think in the beginning, and even now, I still receive negative feedback about sharing my story. Things along the lines of what if you want a boyfriend in the future and he doesn't, and he sees that about you, and all of these horrible things. But for me, what really drove me to come forward was I wanted to take back my story and what had happened to me. So for so long, I was stuck in this phase, and because I was going through the court system at the time with my trafficker, I was stuck in this phase of oh my gosh, he did this to me, and he's the reason I'm like this, and he's the reason why I have to live in a shelter and why I have to do all of these things. And I wanted to take my story from his narrative and all of the horrible things that he was and turn it into something beautiful, to say the least. So I was able to share my story of what happened to me, and even my upbringing and how it all contributed to being trafficked at the time. And I just really wanted to build my own identity rather than living under the identity of someone who had trafficked me.
Thank you, Cassandra. I'm wondering if you could take some time to share about any of the hopes and dreams that you have for the future.
So I hope I become a lawyer. The law school process is pretty rigid. But yeah, so I hope I become a lawyer. I would really like to do work in criminal defense law. And also just on the side, like continue sharing my story and hopefully one day doing a TED Talk about human trafficking and trying to help the community, you know, meeting little boys where they're at, helping reduce, you know, gang violence and also empowering women. And hopefully with all of like this side talks and educating people, we'll start to actually make a difference.
It's amazing. I can't wait to see all the things that you're going to continue doing in the future because you're already doing so much impactful work now. Is there anything else that you would like to add in the minute we have left of the show?
No, I think that's everything. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here. And it was lovely to speak with you.
Well, thank you, Cassandra, so much for taking the time to share and reflect on your experience and for the courage that you displayed by being here, but also just the intelligence and thoughtfulness. And it's just so clear that you're a critical thinker, and it's just great to hear from you and to learn from you. And it was a privilege to speak with you today. If you are tuning into the show today and you are looking for information and support related to human trafficking, please call the National Human Trafficking Hotline number at 1-833-900-1010. Again, that's 1-833-900-1010. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Freedom Fighters Code Grey, and we hope to catch you next time.